Hi, in this film we're going to have a little think about the oboe. And here is the range of the oboe. If you're watching these films in sequence, you'll have noticed that when we were talking about the flutes, we were talking about middle C being the bottom note. Well, here's the oboe. It's a tone lower at the bottom than is the case with the flute. And really the most important things when you're trying to remember the ranges of instruments is to be sure about the bottom notes, because it's very easy to slip off the bottom of the range if you're not careful. But B flat is your bottom note for the oboe. It can go all the way up here. Whether it's advisable to write for the oboe right at the top of the range is a bit questionable. If you've got a really accomplished player who's good at the top, that's great, but some players will just struggle to keep complete control of the instrument, of the tone, of the intonation at the top of the range, and so in many cases it's probably best not to go right up to the top there. We'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. The oboe is a non-transposing instrument, you'll be pleased to hear, so you can write for it at the pitch that you want it to sound, so no complications there. It has this very distinctive sound that's, fairly close to the bassoon, and that's really because these are both double reed instruments. So the flutes we've been thinking about don't have a reed at all. The clarinets have got a single reed. There's just vibrating at the top there. And in the case of the oboe and of the bassoon, we have a double reed. So two pieces of reed sort of tightly bound together that can just do this, and the two pieces of reed can vibrate against each other. It actually takes a huge amount of pressure for the player to produce a sound on the oboe. So it's really a very physical instrument to play. Where the oboe really perhaps comes into its own is in this context, being able to produce these lovely, gentle, lyrical melodies. And often this is at its best sort of in the middle of the range. So you get sounds like this. And you hear that lovely warm tone, and again in the hands of a good player, working nicely with a vibrato to increase the warmth of that sound. This is where the oboe can sound very beautiful. It's also a pretty agile instrument, so there are times when the oboe can kind of fly around quite happily. So you can not be afraid of writing those rather quicker passages that are moving around the range of the instrument if you want to. And again, it has a very distinctive sound that has a certain clarity when you're doing that. Obviously, it can play legato, which is what we're doing at the moment. And it's also very effective when we have staccato articulation like this. We can also have some very effective sounds when the oboe is trilling like this. So you're perfectly at liberty to include trills in an oboe part, and they sound very effective. One thing important to remember about the oboe is that it can't do double and triple tonguing. So whereas with the flutes we were talking about the ability to do double and triple tonguing, so you can do very fast repeated notes, that's something that you can't do with the oboe. Now it can repeat notes pretty quickly, but only to the extent that you can do that as a piece of single tonguing. So that's just something to bear in mind if you want to write extremely fast repeated notes, probably not best on the oboe. Just a couple of observations about what we're saying about the range, we've referred to this thing that maybe the tone is a little bit thin at the top of the range. So, you know, just use the top of the range advisedly. And perhaps the best sounds are below this B. That's why I've just put this B in brackets there. You know, this is where the sound really comes into its own when we get down there. You can sort of hear right at the top. It can be just a little bit piercing. Once it comes down here, the sound warms. And you'll also notice that the heaviest sound, if you like, comes in the bottom fifth of the instrument. So if you get down here, it's still a lovely tone, isn't it? But it's just a slightly more thinner sound in the middle of the range, slightly fatter sound, if you like, bolder sound in the bottom fifth. So worth bearing in mind that slight change of colour. So if you want a really kind of heavy sound at the bottom, that's great down here. Once you get out of the bottom fifth, then you hear this slightly more lyrical sound. So there's a kind of integration of tone across the range of the instrument, but the character of that tone just changes a little bit. And that's something to be aware of when you're writing for the oboe, depending on the kind of sound that you want to produce. But it's a lovely instrument and well worth writing for. So there we are, there's the oboe. Here we are in 3 languages. It's pretty obvious what it is in Italian. It's pretty obvious what it is in German. You've just got these 2 possible words for it. The French is a little less obvious, the hautbois, but there it is, that's the term for oboe in French.